I think most of our viewers probably know me by now, but if you don't, my name's Melinda Salento. I'm the CEO of the Committee for Economic Development of Australia, and thank you for joining us for this session, which I think is going to be a really interesting and engaging one. Let me start by giving you the opportunity to be involved and engaged. If you haven't already done so, you can actually log in to the live stream webpage, click on the link to ask questions and post your questions. The passcode is SON2, and if you want to go directly to the site, it's ceda.pigeonhole.at. Obviously, of course, we want you to engage on social media. Make sure you tag us in that at CEDA_news. And the hashtag that we're using is hashtag SON2020. As per the other sessions that we've been running this morning, we're pretty keen for people to involve themselves in the surveys that we're running. The question that we've got running for this session, it goes something like as follows. The pandemic has highlighted the resilience of Australia's critical services in a time of crisis. Has this set the precedents for a new normal with developments like telehealth and increased working from home? So why don't you get online, have a look at that question, give us your thoughts on that, but also make sure you get your questions in for the session. The earlier you do that, the easier it is for the team to sort of pull together some of the common threads, which means that we're more likely to be able to answer the issues on your mind and address them in a way that hopefully will give you some insights from each of our panellists. Let me now turn to those who are joining us for today's conversation. We've got Christine Holgate, who is the Group Chief Executive Officer and Managing Director of Aussie Post. I'm sure people have become more familiar with seeing Christine in and around the news and other things. We've got Will Irving, the Chief Strategy and Transformation Officer from NBN Co. Will, call out to you. Thanks for your sponsorship of this digital forum. And Brett Redman, who's the Managing Director and Chief Executive Officer of AGL. Let me just start the conversation by sort of setting the scene a little bit. Obviously, critical services has really come to the fore in this crisis. Perhaps not surprisingly, really, when we did our community pulse survey a couple of years ago, we asked people about the issues and the policies that mattered most to them, and critical services featured right at the top of that survey. That's what people told us really mattered to them in terms of the quality of their day-to-day lives and the things that they were most worried about. When we did our company pulse survey last year and we asked the community about their attitudes to business, one of the things that came out there was, yes, they were really looking for business to focus on delivering high-quality goods and services. They wanted business to deliver high-quality goods and services at low cost. But they also wanted businesses to be involved in a broader range of issues. And I think if I look at those two surveys, it sort of really brings today's topic together in a really interesting way. The community is really interested in what our businesses do. They really want our businesses to respond to their needs, particularly at times of need. But they also want them to do that, I think, with looking through a broader lens, if I can put it that way. If I fast forward to 2020, each of you as business leaders has had to deal with unprecedented crises. And I know right now we're sort of right in the middle of the COVID crisis, but I think it's important that we actually cast our mind back to earlier in the year when we were confronted then with another just incredible crisis in the form of the bushfires. How each of you have brought your businesses into these issues, how you've responded to community needs and their issues is, of course, critical to the prosperity of this nation. So I think, we're going to have a really fantastic conversation. We'll have a conversation for about 20 minutes across the panellists, and then we will look to directly address the questions and issues on your minds for about 20 minutes before wrapping up at around 11:30. So that's sort of setting the scene for our conversations. Tremendous challenges for each of you and your organisations, not only in terms of reorganising your businesses at pace, but also keeping your people safe. Perhaps if I start with you, Brett, electricity prices are always a bit of a hot topic in the context of cost of living. You were facing in the crisis, a considerable challenge, I think, with lots of people shifting home, increasing their energy and electricity usage. So one, being focused on the reliability of that, but two, focused on the cost of that at a time when a lot of households were also likely to come under income stress. So really interested in how you prioritised things with your organisation, and also how you thought about keeping your people safe.
So thanks, Melinda. I think if you remember what it was like in March, as the virus was escalating, each week we thought we'd found a floor and suddenly the bottom dropped out again. We didn't know where it was going to end. And there was obviously some horrific projections, some of which are bearing out more in overseas countries, sadly, about where this was heading. And so in the middle of all of that, we were thinking about how do we protect our people and how do we support our customers. And so the starting point of it was to make sure that we were projecting calm leadership. I found it really interesting, some of the conversation, particularly with Treasury throughout all of this, where they talk about not just the crisis from health and the crisis for the economy, but also the crisis of confidence that had to be managed. And that was at the heart of what we were doing, as well as economic and as well as health. So from our people's point of view, it was about rapidly getting them into different sub-teams and ultimately isolated at home. We went from 0 to 4,000 people working from home in the space of a few weeks, including our entire call centre. And I just wouldn't have believed a week or two earlier that we could do it. Suddenly, and leaning into technology, we could. The second thing that we had to do was reassure the population that we would continue to run an essential service come what may. And again, think about the context of that, where we're prepping our people, if you like, working in frontline locations at our generating sites to be mentally ready to keep working come what may, because it was so critical to keep the lights on, while at the same time projecting to the community confidence that that would happen. So we were doing that through different media channels. And finally, from as you mentioned, with price and cost for our customers, putting in place very quickly some shock absorbers. We put in place a COVID-19 customer support program that meant rather than a customer having to go through the usual 15, 20-minute screening conversation with a call centre person to get into a hardship program, they simply had to get online, tell us who they were and say, I'm in hardship or I'm in difficulty because of the crisis, and their debt was immediately deferred if they wanted through the end of July. So it was giving the customers that breathing space to make sure that they could get through the next little while. So dealing with the health crisis, making sure our people were safe, dealing with the crisis of confidence, making sure the community was confident our service would continue, dealing with the economic crisis, making sure that there was a shock absorber there that was easy to access for our customers.
Yeah, I think all really interesting points, and I think many businesses probably going through the same sorts of processes, if you like. I'm interested in one thing, Brett. One of the things that people have talked to me a bit about is that they're very quick to respond to community needs and concerns, particularly around potential hits to income, the affordability of services and things like that, which I think sort of goes to the point I was trying to make at the beginning, that there is a broad range of expectations that the community has about business. How have you found the reaction of your customers to that sort of shock absorber approach and being very flexible around their capacity to pay? And, one, just what their response has been to that, and two, what sort of a take-up have you had on that?
So it's been very positive. So if you like, we had a trial run, which is amazing to say now, through the bushfires, where we were flexing our typical hardship policies. But going into the crisis, when we put this support program in place, from the get-go, we were saying to customers, you don't have to rush to get onto it to try and keep the initial traffic down to be able to manage it. But we were getting 1,000 customers a day signing up to it. We peaked at about 35,000 customers. It's now trailing off, and I'm happy to see that a lot of customers, I think at least 20% of them, don't have any overdue debt in that program. So that's saying to me that they're staying on top of things, but we're also getting ready for the next phase, if you like, the more difficult economic times ahead to keep supporting them. Some of the nice anecdotes, though, that came out of all of this is we're hearing from our call centre reps that one of the first things a lot of customers are saying when they ring in is not to complain, if you like, but to say, are you okay? Yeah, and imagine our call centre reps, some of them sitting in share houses in their bedrooms, trying to maintain the call traffic and supporting customers. It's been really nice that customers have recognised that we're a collection of real humans that are going out, doing above and beyond to look after them. And, the surveys that we do, things like Net Promoter Score and other ways that we have in tapping into customer sentiment, are all showing a big jump throughout all of this process. So I think what we're seeing is a resonance of customers where we've discovered in some ways, the bedrock of what we do being an essential service. And that's reinstilling the pride and just saying what used to be, maybe that kind of boring thing, I'm an essential service, yet what people are seeing is it's not boring. There's lots of technology there that is driving the service that we're getting. And then separately, before the crisis, one of our biggest challenges was community trust. The community is seeing a proof point of how we act, at that moment of truth. And the resonance that we're getting with customers is really positive, as we're seeing through all our survey work. There's been a big restoration of trust, I think, in the sector. Long way to go. It's not to say that the job is done, but there's a platform there to start a fresh conversation with the community that says, when you need us, we're there, and it's resonating.
Yeah, fantastic points, I think, and I think we'll have a conversation a bit later about what we hope to take out of this crisis and what we really want to keep and hold on to. And I think the point you just made is a really strong one, Brett. Not just about pride in essential services, but the fact that we're now at a moment where people are just sort of realising it is people at the other end of the phone, and too often we talk about corporate Australia and business, and I think sometimes people forget that within those organisations are people just like them. I'm hopeful that if we can kind of keep that connection going, then some of the conversations that we have about the really important reforms that we're going to have to see in the future start from that proposition rather than maybe a bit more of an us and them. Christine, fantastic opportunity then to segue to you. I mean, I think Aussie Post is one of those organisations that does feel like it sits within the Australian community. I think, we may have lost our love affair with written letters and going out to the post box and getting, letters from friends and all the rest of it. But I have to tell you, I suspect I speak on behalf of most of Australians saying I've loved Aussie Post in this crisis. With 3 teenage daughters at home, we've become pretty used to getting the knock on the door and the parcel left on the doorstep. So just really interested in how you have responded as the leader of Aussie Post to this crisis, how you've ramped up services in the way that you have, but in the same way, as Brett's described his challenges, just kept people safe.
Well, thank you, Melinda. I think you hit the nail on the head earlier. We started the year with bushfires, Brett, then we had the floods, and now we've had COVID. And there were 2 big tests prior to COVID for all of us. Our strategy has been quite simple. It's protect, serve, safeguard. Our people have been amazing. When I say our people, I mean not only our own employees, I mean those of our licensed post offices, I mean our delivery contractors. They've all worked with us. We've kept on working. We've remained open right through the crisis. The first thing was keep the people safe. So we had to introduce safe distancing, PPE. Safe distancing when you're working in a processing plant is quite challenging. We went into shifts. I'm sure many of us did, green and gold. We put screens up in post offices to keep people safe. We had 4,500 of our workers at one point within just 3 days go to work from home and the VPN up and running. So that created a massive operational challenge in itself. We also, our largest partner is Qantas. And Qantas, of course, were one of the first to get impacted, first with international, then domestically. And we became very aware of the challenge for employees when they get stood down. And we didn't want to stand down our employees because there's always that risk if you don't operate in a crisis, you can become irrelevant. So we wanted to keep working. So we reached out with the support of, first of all, with Woolworths. We got the support of Brad and then started delivering vulnerable food packages. With the Pharmacy Guild, we got the right to carry medicine and we kept on operating. And we saw then massive changes started to happen inside our business, huge volatility. Passports fell sort of 90%, not really a surprise when all of international closed down. Letters were swinging all over. And of course, parcels started to boom. Throughout the period, parcels are up about 90%, but it's not just the number. The size and weight of these parcels were up about 40%. We had to introduce new mail redirection services while people then went to work somewhere else, and everything just seemed to happen. And I'm sure, Brett, and Will, you had the same situation. It felt like it just happened immediately. And when we looked out to our international peers, the picture was not great. I guess just as we felt we were starting to get on top of things, then, of course, Qantas sort of reduced its domestic network. And that's what we use to carry our letters and parcels, across the country. And so then we found ourselves in a situation, parcels still surging, that we had to charter, effectively 17 aeroplanes every day flying our parcels now. We've had to open 16 pop-up facilities. We've had hundreds of employees from all parts of the organization volunteering to come and help out in that parcel part as we serve the country. But what became really interesting in that was that the customers' expectations of us years ago was always that we must deliver this letter on time, we must do this. What became was that, where's my parcel? And I want it tomorrow. Even though the volumes just exploded. We've had 10 weeks operating like the size of Christmas. I'm sure that Will in a moment is going to say exactly the same thing as me, but these were massive operational changes which brought huge costs. And I think sometimes people forget that operating in this way, safe distances, having to bring in a lot of contractors, outsourcing work, getting PPE does bring a lot of cost inside the business. So we needed to look at the business when we talked to our international peers, who arguably you could say Italy, Spain, France, the UK, and even the US were ahead of us. Then the picture was not great. They talked about massive losses, really dire situations in their businesses. So we reached out to our employees. We asked all of our head office, corporate center employees to help as we supported the frontline people. And even on the executive team and the board, they all took 20% pay cuts, stock bonuses for this period, and everybody came together. A lot of our employees took leave for the month of April to keep our costs down. So it's a really incredible teamwork effort that pulled together to enable us to have the money to invest on that front line. But our roles significantly changed as we went through this period. And I have to say an enormous thank you. Our employees have been brilliant. Our posties have been brilliant. The communities have been fantastic, but so have our partners.
Yeah, just a fascinating business case there, isn't it, Christine? I can't imagine the case that we're going to see written up about this. I think, all the things you talked about, I'm sure, again, are resonating with a lot of our viewers. The line that you said, 10 weeks of Christmas, I think that really puts it into really sharp relief, if you like. The other thing I just think is worth highlighting, and it's probably a nice transition into the conversation we'll have with Will about what NBN's done, is just the way in which I think at the moment with our borders closed, it's really easy to sort of think of ourselves sort of locked away here, but just the way in which you sort of were reaching out to people overseas to try to understand their perspectives. Even at this time, we're still getting those connections. We're still trying to learn from each other. I just think that's a really important message. And I think more broadly, Christine, what you've talked about and Brett as well, I think often there's a narrative in Australia about the fact that we sort of lack a bit of dynamism and that we're not as agile as we might be. But again, it's just great examples of how we have managed to do that through this crisis. And just so you know, the point about cost is one I'm trying to get people to focus on, because I think it's something that's not getting enough attention, that we've built a lot of cost in the business. And at some point in time, we're going to have to figure out, how we deal with that. Will, your time, I guess, probably NBN Co. I think initially, at least, there wouldn't have been an organisation that had greater expectations and perhaps more pressure, and people sort of watching and fingers crossed hoping that everything would work, because wow, we needed it to. So maybe you might just like to talk us a little bit through how NBN got its head around that challenge and did so pretty quickly.
Yeah, very much so. Thanks, Melinda. Similar experience to Christine and Brett as well, particularly in terms of focusing first on our staff. But to the point about sort of overseas, we very early contacted Telecom Italia. You may recall that they locked down northern Italy before just about anywhere else, at least in sort of the Western world. And we were very keen to learn what did they see in terms of traffic, because we knew very quickly, as we're all doing right now, that we would see a very significant increase in demand for the network, but we weren't sure exactly how much and we weren't sure what the pattern would look like. And we faced two issues. One is sort of what is the peak download time? And it's in fact in the evenings. And normally about 9 o'clock on a Friday night is historically the busiest time for our network, and it's people at home watching Netflix, doing online shopping, etc. And what Telecom Italia was seeing was a 35 to 40% increase in traffic in the evenings, and it was because people were not out at the restaurants, they weren't out with friends, the sport had stopped. And so we initially thought, right, that's what we need to target as the likely uplift. In the daytime, we knew it would go up a lot more than that. If you've got people in an office, meeting, they're not using video. Even if they're doing it between different cities, it's one connection with 10 people on each end, compared to what we might have today, 10 people in a meeting and it's 10 connections each way. So what we ended up seeing was about a 30 to 35% increase at its absolute peak. And by the way, it is now trending down again in the evening. And we've seen more than 100% increase in usage during the day. So from about late February, we thought that was what the trend was going to be. And we brought forward essentially 9 months worth of work in our core network. This is the really thick pipes, if you like, to do what was otherwise going to be capacity for the completion of the network rollout. We have about 7 million homes and businesses connected on NBN today. By the time we complete the migration process over the next 18 months or so, we end up sort of well more than 8 million. So we'd already planned for some capacity, but we knew that was going to grow very rapidly. And for things like video this time of day, we've seen 5-6 years worth of growth happen literally in a matter of weeks. So we had people working around the clock. And then we started to think about how do we improve the sort of continuity and reliability of service. Because of all the build work we've been doing, we've often had to turn people off during the day while we do capacity augmentation. It's kind of like the freeways. You've got to slow people to 40 and shrink to 2 lanes while you build another lane on the freeway. Not great if you suddenly got the busiest traffic jam in history happening at the same time. And so, again, working very much with our staff in some really innovative ways, we shifted a whole range of things to reduce by about half the number of outages we had during the day so that people could homeschool and sort of work in an uninterrupted fashion. And we've learned a whole lot about work practices in doing that. In terms of our field staff, we do give or take 40, 50,000 home visits a week at this point as we're connecting customers. And obviously the need for PPE was a critically important for us and challenging in periods. But we're also able to do things like have the customer go inside and with their phone video what they were doing, and we'd have the tech sort of out on the veranda, out on the footpath saying, okay, now do this and do that. And so we avoided the need for physical contact and yet got the job done. At a commercial level, to the point around costs, because of that growth in demand, we knew that if we did nothing, we would see a very significant growth in revenue at a point in time which the economy and our retailers could least afford it for all the reasons that have been recognised. So we did a couple of things very early on. One was to say we would give that 40% growth in capacity to our telco retailers at no extra charge. So effectively, the February billings would be what we would charge on the way through, regardless of the amount that usage grew. And then we announced a 3-pronged customer support package for people schooling at home, for business and for consumers facing hardship. Again, designed to make sure that, just as Brett was describing, people were not disconnected because of an inability to afford the service at that time. And that has worked very well. Retailers have each done things in slightly different ways to implement that, but it's sat behind what's occurred. And then in regional and rural Australia, where customers rely on the satellite network, particularly in remote places, we also doubled effectively what we were supplying there as well, to try to get people through this period. So that gives you a sense of how we were thinking about it. The good news is that demand is slowly coming down. It will never go back to where it was in February. We've learned to work this way. We just did a survey of our staff for our annual employee engagement survey, and only a small percentage of staff would want to work in the office 5 days a week for the time being at least. So we think a hybrid way of working is going to be here for a long time to come.
Thanks, Will. I'm starting to get some questions coming through now, so I'm going to address some of the questions, and then just a question on notice for everyone. I think you will expect this because, you know, one of the things we really want to do is learn from what we've experienced and try to take those lessons forward. So I'm going to ask you to sort of close out the session, you know, what you think the things are that we need to take out of this crisis, the things you've learned about your businesses and your people. But I'm going to hook it back to the survey results that I've got coming in. But first, if I can just direct one question to each of you just to get your perspectives. I think a lot of us who are leading organisations, you know, we talked about safety of people straight at the top as the number one priority. But increasingly, as we've worked from home, one of the issues is really securing employee wellbeing, but also employee wellbeing given the pace of change and the uncertainty that we're living with at the moment, which I think has affected all of us. So I'm just interested in, and that's a question from Belinda through our Pigeonhole, you know, just understanding how you've kept on top of employee wellbeing and some of the things that you've done to ensure that. Perhaps straight to you, Brett, if I could.
Thanks, Melinda. Yeah, I think, and we've just completed 2 big surveys of our people as well, and the feedback we were getting was that they were responding very well and very happy with how we looked after their wellbeing going into this. But it broke down to, again, if you remember those frantic early days where everyone's heading for the hills. And so grab your laptop, get yourself set up at home. But then there was a very hard, quick and fast assessment going on about the ergonomic conditions that people had at home, and that quick discovery that certainly I learnt that very quickly. Sitting at your kitchen table chair all day is a fast way to get a bad back. And so, you know, we were going through looking at how we're getting the right equipment to people, whether it was chairs, proper laptops, you name it, big scramble to get the physical side done. But that got overtaken quite quickly with mental health. And so, you know, we've been running lots of engagements, you know, looking at mental health, starting with the basic "Are you okay?" things, encouraging teams to check in with each other, getting people talking to each other. The next phase of that is sort of that, you know, I've seen it described as Zoom fatigue. Again, starting to recognise that while it's good to keep checking in and see people physically, spending all day, you know, on video is quite tough. The final part of it now is, again, the same surveys are coming back saying, we think you've really looked after us as we've dispersed. Now we really want you to look after us as we head back to the office, and lots of concern there, which I guess is linked with to get people to disperse and socially isolate quickly. Both government and company had to put in place some strong messaging around health and looking after each other and staying spread out. I think that now feeds and informs a big concern now about how do we get back together again in a safe and healthy fashion. So people are really watching what we do next, and how we manage the return to office, the return to site is going to be really important for mental health and for engagement with our people as well, so that they feel safely treated through it. So I don't expect anyone is going to go back to the old model of working. It's going to be some kind of hybrid, but how we look after people into this is going to be so important to maintaining engagement and mental health going forward.
Yeah, thanks, Brett. Christine, how about your 4,500 people who all of a sudden found themselves working at home?
Well, of course, mental health is also really important for those people who are out there in the community, because our people go to every home and every business every day. And at the beginning of this pandemic, don't forget, they were knocking on doors and not really sure, you know, the environment they were putting themselves in. So that is, of course, we give them the PPE, but that is stressful for people. So there was a lot set up. Of course, have the EAP. We have websites, where people can go in and check on coronavirus. But we did an enormous amount to keep communicating with our people and to keep checking them as individuals. So this cascade management idea that people have to do a check-in even the 4,500 working at home, the managers had to come back and say that they'd connected those people or they'd checked in with them. We communicated, whether it was daily briefings, it was briefings in facilities, it was newsletters to people at home, it was text messages, it was videos of one of them talking to them. It was all sorts of different tools. And every time we felt like are we overdoing it? We doubled it up. And I think that's what's really important, is that power of communication and giving people the tools to do it and keep connected, keep them having conversations. But I would say it was equally as important to our people on the front line as it was for those 4,500 people who work from home, because they were incredibly brave. The people in our post offices, the people in our posties, our delivery drivers, our contractors, our LPOs, they remained open when whole streets closed, and that's often forgotten. So they were pretty fantastic. I spoke to the head of our LPOG, it's one of our licensed post office groups, consortium, Angela Cramp, yesterday, and she was telling me she didn't have time to be worrying about mental health because she was too busy. But I'm sure there is that thing about exhaustion, and they just did an absolutely incredible job in very challenging circumstances.
Yeah, and thanks for making that point about the extra stress that comes for people who are sort of out and about, because I think it's an easy thing to forget when you're sort of cocooned at home. I sit on the board of a company that does aged care, home care services, and the home care services people were, obviously at the front line there. And I think kind of to loop back to one of the points that Brett made earlier on, just about the pride in the services that your people and your companies deliver. I think that burden of knowing that you're actually an important connection to people, that you're bringing something to them that is really literally critical to them. And you mentioned earlier, Christine, carrying medicines and things like that. So that balance of wanting to keep themselves safe, the uncertainty, it's just an incredibly stressful situation. So thanks for calling that out, because I think it's something we can lose sight of. There's just so many things happening at the moment. It's hard to grab onto all of them that we need to. Will, perhaps quickly to you, if you wanted to just any observations on the sort of wellbeing piece, and then I'm going to give us a bit of time to address this kind of forward-looking question.
Yeah, two very quick things. One, we saw a lot of innovation, particularly our field workforce, exactly the situation Christine mentions, just different ways of doing things, calling ahead to check the situation of the place they were going into. The other thing we noticed for our office staff, and we did the things that Christine and Brett have mentioned, is we now have a quiet hour between 12:30 and 1:30, and that recognised not only were people working from home, but with schools and kinders and so on, there was an added layer of caring responsibility that many of our staff have that they didn't have when they were at the office. So it was actually even more complex than just moving, if you like, from the office to home. And a quiet hour where we'd officially have no meetings, which let people make lunch for the kids or go and get some exercise or walk the dog or whatever. It's balanced the day, and it's in fact done a huge amount for the mental well-being, and by the way, for productivity in the afternoon as well, I'll candidly say. But there are some different ways of operating, and we've seen that be a particularly useful thing for our organisation.
Yeah, thanks for that quiet hour. I've written that down, I have to say. I'd love a quiet hour. I think one of the challenges when you're working from home, and Christine was talking about what all of you have spoken about, just communicate. I think when you've got your own work and you're leading an organisation as well, it's a message for me. I'm going to take away that having a bit of a quiet hour is maybe not a bad idea. Let me give you the poll results because I think it's going to set us up then for the last 10 minutes of our conversation. So the question we asked was, has the pandemic set precedents for the new normal? And it's been touched on already, but with developments like telehealth, the work from home, the sorts of things we've done, is that the new normal? Now, I don't think you're going to be surprised by the results here. Yes, absolutely, 49%. Yes, in some areas, 49%, not really 2%. So I guess that sort of sets the scene. Most of us think things are going to change. I'm going to cobble in another question, sort of try to hit a couple of things at once in my question to you. I think I've been thinking about this a little bit like New Year's resolutions. We start the year, we think these are the things that we want to change. It's great, we want to do this differently, but then they sort of slip away. So my question to each of you is, what are the things that you think we need to be very deliberate about retaining the lessons we've learned out of this crisis. And in particular, Emmanuel's asked a question about decision-making in a crisis. And I think one of the things everyone talks about is the speed with which decisions have been made. And there's been some good things learned from that. But how do we think about that? So what do we want to hold on to, and maybe even in how you've made decisions, the sorts of things you think we need to remember from that? And perhaps first to you, Christine.
Thanks, Melinda. Wow, big question. Look, decision-making's got to be one of them. Our people were amazing. You know, to open 16 pop-up parcel sorting facilities. Now, a parcel sorting facilities could be the size of a football pitch. So this is not a shop. This is a massive operation that often they set up and got operational within a week. So if you empower your people, they will make responsible decisions and good decisions. And actually it keeps them more motivated. And actually in this crisis, you know, our attendance levels are actually record high. So again, your people will come together. They know what needs to happen. And I think that's a really important thing to go into the future. But one thing I, definitely take out of this crisis, Melinda, is that, for 210 years, Australia Post has been about connecting people. And probably most people think of us as a letters business still, even though really it's only 20% of what we sort of do today. What has significantly changed for us through this is that actually mums and dads at home, lots of small businesses now depend on us, absolutely depend on us to deliver those parcels. And that's really important. A lot of small businesses started to go into hibernation, became worried whether they were going to close. They're going to face a really difficult time with an economic recession. They actually went online. Some brilliant stories of businesses that went online for the first time. Sure, Will can add to this. And actually what we've seen, that's changed. It's changed shopping. 200,000 households shopped for the first time. They'd never shopped before. And 1 million people shop more than once a month who had never shopped before. We saw, 3 million people go onto our website one day. That's just phenomenal numbers that were happening. So it's changed. E-commerce has changed. I'm sure, e-commerce is now, I think, about 15% of the retail market. My guess it's going to be 20% in the next 5 years. That's not going backwards. We have to step up, get behind this, support those people at home and support those small businesses and our large businesses really succeed. And we need to all brace ourselves because we're heading for a really difficult time.
Mm. Yeah, I think the challenges for the future, we're sort of defining this almost as a pre and post COVID, but we know it's not going to feel like that. And the pace of change and the speed with which we seem to be moving from one circumstance to the next is, I think, will continue to challenge us. Christine, I have to say the numbers that you keep throwing out, I keep trying to jot them down. I'm an economist, so I've got all these amazing numbers that you've presented. It's just extraordinary. So thank you for those insights. Brett, how about you? What are you thinking AGL needs to hold on to in its sort of its COVID resolution, if you like?
So I think we've got lots of things that sort of go to innovation and ways of working with decision making. As we've gone through all this, one of our big mantras was not to defer anything. Everything that had to be thought about, we made a fast call on would we do it thoroughly and properly as normal? Would we do it quickly or would we just not do it at all? But what we didn't do was defer things because that just would pile up things for the future. And that was all about trusting your people and empowering them and just saying, just get on with it, make a call, keep moving. But I think from my mind, the big thing that we've built up during this crisis and that I want to see us keep and retain going forward is trust. Trust broadly in institutions, whether it's political, whether it's corporate, whether it's industry. There's been a material shift in the level of trust that's come from how we're responding in this moment of truth. And if we can hang on to that, that's the gate opener. That trust, that confidence in the way that we're operating is the gate opener to get on and do so many of the things that we need to do going forward. You think about what the Prime Minister was talking about yesterday when it comes to growth. When it comes to that adventure of growth, if you like, that will be enabled if we trust the institutions that we're working with, have faith in the whys that they're doing it as well as the what that they're doing. That will translate into our industry. That will translate into our company. If we have customers and communities on board, it will make such a huge difference in our ability to act and support customer and community going forward. So trust is the thing I think we built. It's fragile. So that's the thing I most want to hang on to going forward.
Yeah, a couple of really strong messages there, and the trust one is great. I mean, I think I commented on our company pulse survey results from last year, and the message I got from those results is that people do want to trust business. They do believe business has a really important role to play, not just in delivering profits and goods and services, but more broadly. And they expect leaders to talk about things and that are broader than just their business. But the thing that makes it real is actually connecting it to people, connecting your issues to the community. And I think that's what we've seen through this crisis. And I agree with you. I really hope that that's something we can hold on to. Will, I'm going to give you about 90 seconds. I'm sorry to give you.
That's fine. Look, I just echo what Brett said, but I think you look at a common purpose and how that builds trust and it lets relationships get built. And we've seen it across the political divide. We've seen it in our industry. Again, we had the ACCC sitting in meetings with the group of sort of network operators to jointly manage how would things be delivered to the interests of everybody. And the other piece is, I think, from a decision-making point of view, leaders being clear what is the outcome that's needed and then leaving it to very bright people across our organisations to figure out how, rather than perhaps the old tendency to take longer and be a bit more prescriptive. And we've just unlocked so much capability and potential, and a bit less sort of directive management often leads to a better outcome. So we're very keen to sort of keep that sort of more distributed decision-making that we needed in the crisis, and we think will serve us well, because people are adaptable and it's amazing what they can achieve, and we've all seen it.
Well, what a great set of messages to finish off on. Thank you to our audience for the questions that you've sent in. I'm sorry we couldn't get to all of them, but also just a really very sincere thank you to Christine, Brett and Will for your contributions. It's been a great conversation. I think we could have kept talking for another hour or more. There's huge interest in how your businesses have responded to this crisis and huge acknowledgement of the great contributions. It's important to each and every one of us. And I suspect we will be talking a lot about what we've learned and what we hope to take forward. Thank you so much, and thank you for your support for CEDA. We'll be moving now to the next session, which is looking at the issue of vulnerable communities. So lots to talk about there. Thank you again, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.